Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Profiles in Risk. I am your host, Nick Lamparelli. I am very pleased to introduce this morning Juliette Murphy. Juliette is the co-founder and CEO of FloodMapp. Everyone knows how much I enjoy talking about flood. This is going to be a great one. FloodMapp is a venture-backed startup offering real-time flood mapping and smart flood alerts. Their interactive products aim to improve safety and understanding of flood risk and to minimize flood-related damages. Very close to my heart. All the way from down under, Australia, Juliette Murphy, welcome.
Thank you so much, Nick. What a wonderful introduction. Yeah, it's great to be here on your podcast. I've been listening and pretty excited to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you are a world traveler, which is not surprising given the peril that you're focused on, which is flood, which is a global issue. And being a venture-backed startup, you have a lot of pitches you have to make and a lot of investors you have to satisfy and a lot of customers you have to reach. So I think as a global traveler, what's that like? What's it like to travel the world in that kind of stressful environment? I think the last time we talked, you were literally jumping from plane to plane and going from place to place. It was hard to pin you down.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's how would I describe it? It's incredible and an amazing adventure, but yeah, for sure. It gets stressful at times. I think actually this year we've been back and forth to the US 3 times now. And yeah, potentially coming back in January. So yeah, it's always an exciting adventure. And on the last trip, I came for the InsurTech Connect conference in Las Vegas. And that was seriously the most incredible conference I've ever been to in my life. It was an experience. I was really sick leading up to the conference, and I'm glad I kind of just made it on the plane, had really bad bronchitis, but you gotta go and get to these pitches and tell people about FloodMapp. So I kind of got some cough medicine, scrambled up as much voice as I could and got on stage and pitched at the conference and just met the most incredible people. Taking away 2 big kind of learnings from that event was that, people in insurance are so friendly. From me not coming from the background of insurance, the amount of people that I met that were just willing to sit down, have a coffee with me, have a lunch with me, your colleague, Jim Rice,
Mm-hmm.
so lovely. And, bring me up to speed on all the ins and outs of the insurance industry. And the other takeaway would be that insurers really know how to party.
Oh, wow. Okay. I haven't been in too many other industries, so I would guess just watching The Wolf of Wall Street that we're probably not up to finance levels in terms of partying, but a few conferences I've gone to, they know how to have fun. Before we jump into FloodMapp, I just want to say I think you're on to something, and I think part of it has to do with even though it's tech, insure tech, I think folks that are in the industry, we recognize that the pie is so big, it's so massive, that there is not going to be an Uber moment, because there cannot be one company that can sort of monopolize everything, because it's too vast. Just in our peril that we deal with, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars in annual loss when it comes to global flood. There's not one company, there's not 2 companies, there's not 3 companies. It's going to take all the companies in the global ecosystem to kind of challenge that particular problem. So I think, the folks that are friendly to you, I think it's just the realization that we all kind of have to work together, that there's, there are a bunch of solutions out there and we need to ferret them out.
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. When we're talking about natural catastrophes, the losses are just getting so big. And I think there's this real realization of that within the industry. And like you said, no one wants to monopolize it. No one wants to take on that risk alone. It's a team effort. The more you can diversify your portfolio, the better. Share the risk around. It's better for business,
Completely.
And so, it's an exciting time to be in flooding and in insurance. As the audience will learn, I'm very passionate about flooding and helping people. So I'm sure Sure, we'll talk about all of that lots.
We're going to start right now. Let's go right in. FloodMapp. I like to give all my guests an opportunity to have a little elevator pitch. So FloodMapp, what is that? In your own words.
Sure. Yeah, so FloodMapp provides predictive flood mapping and alert products for insurers. So we're all about improving safety, improving the customer experience, but also loss prevention for insurers. So, as most of the listeners probably know, flooding is costing insurers globally and the economy in general like $50 billion per year, and that's climbing every year. And most of this is due to the fact that people don't really have much warning time. And if they do have warning time, warnings are very broad. So, like if you order a pizza on Friday night from Uber Eats, you can see that pizza coming to your door, like 5 minutes, and you can see it on the map. But when it comes to an approaching flood event, like a natural disaster, you kind of are left in the dark. And so this is why time and time again, like this is why in Hurricane Harvey that hit Houston, there were like 1 million flooded vehicles. But like a car, that's something you can move, right? If you knew that it was happening to you.
Completely.
And so that's what FloodMapp is all about. We're about predicting. We have like a rapid technology that we've developed that predicts the floods before it happens and maps them, like the Google Maps for floods, and then gives people personalized and location-specific alerts to be able to evacuate safely with their family and take their valuables. And just recently, we're sort of, after some conversations with great people like yourself, Nick, we're also looking into how we can help insurers on the underwriting space as well with flood scenario modeling and mapping.
Yeah.
So that's probably my real short elevator pitch.
No, that's really good. That's really because it's a space that, quite honestly, not a lot of folks are tackling. So let's go through the punch list of questions.
Sure.
Geographically, where does FloodMapp operate?
So we operate currently out of Australia, but in the last year or so, we've been getting a lot of interest in the US. So exciting times. We're looking to set up operations there next year.
So from a FloodMapp perspective, can FloodMapp handle beyond Australia for real-time alerts?
For real-time alerts, currently we're doing some pilots. So we're piloting in Australia and also in Texas at the moment, and then we're focusing on some of the eastern states. So North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia are next on our pilot list. So yeah, the tech team's currently running a lot of validation and models in those areas. It will take some time until we can offer the capability across continental US, but that's really our next year plan.
Okay, so let's rewind back to the summer. Hurricane Florence hits the Carolinas and causes an immense amount of flooding. Again, 2 years in a row where a hurricane makes landfall, and it's not the wind that's the problem. It's that the storm stalls and just dumps 40 to 50 inches of water within a 24 or 48 hour period. And it doesn't matter where you are, no geographic terrain can handle that. So could you walk us through like your tech team? Do they take an event like Florence and kind of reassemble it to sort of see like this is what we would have done? Explain how your tech team operates and how it validates its work based off of the events that are actually happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So take an event like Florence. What we can do is agencies like the USGS, they have a whole lot of gauged rainfall and river height data and river flow data. So all of that is incredibly useful. So we gather all that data that's occurred, historic data. We also gather the terrain data of the topography. So we build that into our elevation models. And then we're able to simulate. Basically, our tech is about two parts. So there's the hydrology. So basically modeling, taking rainfall into our models, and then simulating what stream flow would have occurred. So turning that rainfall rate into like a volume per time river flow. So that's the hydrology part. And then we're also looking to turn that river flow into basically an inundation map, that you could see on the ground of where is going to be the flooded areas. And that's the hydraulics part. So that's more dependent on factors like, topography, the steepness of the catchment, the roughness of the catchment, talking about, is the coverage grass, is it trees, is it buildings? All of that sort of thing affects like the velocity of water and the flow. So we basically take that data, we put it into our models, and then we're able to validate them against the historical data. So what our predicted flood heights are compared to the historical flood heights that occurred, and also what our inundation maps look like in comparison with the inundation maps from that event, where someone has gone out and recorded the observed high water marks and come up with the actual inundation that occurred. And so then our team is sort of able to validate how our models are performing. And with some of our events, we're sort of getting up near like 90% accuracy. Like they're not ever going to be 100% accurate, and we know that they're rapid, but I think knowing 80%, 90% accuracy what might happen is way better knowing that beforehand than knowing 100% after the event, which is sort of what happens now. So I mean, take for example, now you look at sort of Hurricane Florence coming over the Carolinas. Like I was sort of on the NOAA pages and the National Weather Service and looking at like what predictions, what sort of information some of the residents had. And in some areas it was incredibly broad, like, best scenario sort of county warnings, in some cases statewide warnings. Like there was a statewide flash flood warning for North Carolina and for South Carolina. And so if you live in one of these states, and the reality to evacuate is like, well, do I take the 2 kids? It's nighttime. Do I pack up the pets in the car and leave to get a hotel? It's the whole state. Like, surely it's not going to affect me. That's the thinking that someone is faced with. And then the decision to stay, can be logical, or, you evacuate but don't necessarily plan that your house will get flooded. And so it's a really hard situation to be in. So that's where something like FloodMapp will come in, and maybe, 24 hours before that event, we'll release a prediction, a mapped layer that gives an estimate, a forecast of where will be the flood impacted properties, and kind of personalized alerts and information for those people, like, sandbag locations or evacuation centers. So that's a bit of a summary of how our tech works and sort of how it's performing currently.
Yeah. So right now, I think as an industry, there are some tools where we can do storm surge. As the storm's approaching, we can run models and get some estimates of where the surge is going to go, but nothing once you get a mile or 2 inland. There's just nothing that exists. And so you're absolutely right. That would be incredibly valuable from a safety perspective. As an quasi-insurer, I'm also very interested in understanding, where's the water going to go? We're writing risks in those areas. So I want to know ahead of time, where the claims adjusters might need to go, which properties might be affected, who should I proactively reach out to? I had nothing like that, so it was, it seems immensely valuable. And I would concur on the gauge data. We actually use the gauge data from an underwriting standpoint. My elevator pitch to insurers was Carolinas was actually a very benevolent place. No, benevolent's the wrong word. An optimized place to actually write flood coverage, because they don't get hurricanes of the same frequency that Florida gets. Yet it's not a flat landscape like the Gulf. It's got terrain. It's got mountains and hills and slopes and things like that. So you can imagine my horror when year 1, as I've been pounding the table, we need to write more business in the Carolinas. Hurricane Florence hits, and I'm like, oh geez, here we go. But it was the gauge data was actually very helpful. Like from a storm surge perspective, we used that to justify the output that was coming out of the models. So there are a lot of tools that are there that haven't been used, and now it seems like you're using them to create something that's very valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, You know what? And I get really excited about, moving flood map models into the US, because what our team is finding is that, the US, like the USGS, for example, they are just miles ahead of the way that they handle their data and integrations than we are in Australia. So it's funny, like in some ways I think we're pretty far ahead, but in some ways we're like a little bit behind down under. So the USGS offers really good APIs for all of this real-time data. So we can hook into real-time data. Like the team has read in real-time data across the US for rainfall and for river height, and also for tidal gauges. So we've got like sort of, the coastal representation of what's happening with storm surge and tides. We've got the inland data coming in terms of like rainfall and the responding river height. And they've linked that all up to our real-time models. So everything is, it's not a manual process like it used to be in my previous career. It's this rapid process where our models are linked to run instantly as soon as certain rainfall thresholds or river thresholds are triggered. Our models run, and they run rapidly, like, a couple of seconds, because the data has all been preloaded and pre-set up. And so it's a really exciting time to be there. And also like the elevation data too, like you guys have this complete sort of publicly available coverage of like 0.5 meter, resolution digital elevation model, which is really pretty high standard. Like in Australia, a lot of it, our country in the middle of the country is sort of quite, desert, sort of not that populated area. And we're working with 30-meter resolution data in some places. So it's really exciting to be working with like this high quality data and to be like putting it to towards an innovation like this, because I feel like it's almost being wasted. I'm like, wow, there's so much we could do with this data. And so that's what we're doing at FloodMap.
Yep. Will your technology also be able to handle like flash floods? I'm thinking of Elliott City, Maryland, where within like an hour or two, they got like 12 to 14 inches of rain, and it's all, I'll link some YouTube videos. I've talked about this before,
Oh
and
my God.
it was like
Yeah.
a waterfall going through their downtown area. Will your
Yeah.
technology be able to handle those kinds of situations where people have like an hour and to make a
Yeah.
decision?
It's so scary. And we've had the same thing happen here in 2011 in the Lockyer Valley floods. And so we're definitely working on that. I think it's, with flooding, when you're looking at the warning time you have available to give, it's always a function of the catchment size. So in catchments like that, smaller catchment, they're faster responding because the water has, less less distance to travel, steeper catchments. So it can be harder to get the warning out, although, yeah, so right now our models are really focused on the more riverine flooding, but we're still working on flash flooding alerts based on, that's more hydrology driven. So it's about sort of that rainfall runoff response. And we're certainly looking at what we can do to provide alerts there. And it's going to be a case of continual improvement. So we're going to go through a series of pilots and just, check and QA our tech to make sure that it's reliable in times of crisis. But yeah, we're going to give everyone as much warning as we can, even if we think we can do 30 minutes, 10 minutes, like it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So besides the obvious value and need to society, it's still gutsy to start a company. It's still gutsy to step into a space where you have to raise money, create a product, sell a product, manage a team, all of that. So go back to before FloodMapp even existed. What was the driving force? What could you talk about the moment where you were like, I need to do this, and why? What was what drove you? What drove you insane?
Yeah, it's a good story. So my background, as maybe some people have guessed, it's not in insurance. I studied environmental engineering, and then I went into water resources engineering, which is, everything like hydrology, hydraulics, flood modeling, all kinds of fun modeling. And I loved it. So I did that for about 10 years with big global consulting firms in Brisbane, Australia, also in Calgary in Canada, and worked in some projects in Indonesia. So solving sort of hydrological challenges all over the world, dealing with lots of rain and like snow melt. And I always loved it. I was fascinated. But I think the more driver to start FloodMapp, on top of just, you know, my professional domain experience, it really came from some personal experience. And so in 2011, we had really catastrophic flooding in Brisbane. There was about, you know, hundreds of thousands of evacuations, over 20,000 homes inundated, you know, billions and billions of damages. And one of my friends, Cheryl, she, you know, her house got flooded, and she had no idea that her house was even at risk of flooding. And to sort of help paint the picture, if you can imagine a house, if, you know, this is the house and this is the peak of the roof, the flood swallowed her house over the peak of her roof. Like, she lost tiles off the roof. Like, it was unfathomable amount of flooding. And she, you know, she managed to get out safely with her daughter, which is really amazing, but she lost everything that she owned. We went back there to clean up, and it was just, you know, a mess of mud and furniture on top of each other. Like, it was like just total devastation. And she just said, you know, I would have liked a little bit more time to save some of the things that mattered, like my family photos. We spent kind of, you know, days after that, like refurbishing her photos, trying to restore them and save them from like the mud. And then, so anyway, recovering from that experience was kind of that, like, after that, I moved to Calgary in Canada, and it flooded there again in 2013. I felt like it was following me. It was kind of bizarre. And so, yeah, it's like a $6 billion damage event, like 5,000 evacuations. 5 of my friends I took into my house because they had nowhere to go and had, you know, no warning. Like, people lost everything again. And so I really dug into, you know, all the similarities between these two events were really similar in that, like, people needed more warning time, and they needed a better understanding of, you know, what flooding is, what the floodplain is, where are the affected areas. And it just sort of came to me, you know, like, I'd sort of been developing apps as a bit of a hobby, like on my weekend, because I'm a huge nerd, a flood nerd. And like, I was like, oh, we need a flood app. It sort of came to me as this passion project, and I sort of started working away on weekends. And it wasn't until, you know, I was talking to someone from a local government in Brisbane, and they were like, wow, like, that's really valuable. Are you going to like offer this as a service? And I was thinking, man, like, a business. I've never thought of starting my own business, but I mean, yeah, that's how it started. Like, it really was driven by passion to solve a problem for some people that I really cared about. And I saw them, in my opinion, needlessly suffer, because whilst, you know, my friend Cheryl was struggling to like evacuate safely with all her things, there were people that I knew in my industry who were in the offices running the flood models to check their houses. And so this is just data that should be available to everyone, to the public, you know. But the problem is the models that we run, you know, a lot of them are set up, they run like maybe 18 hours, 24 hours, because they're so computationally intensive. So my whole problem that I was solving was to come up with a model that can run when we need it, really fast, to get that information to the people that it matters. And yeah, so I kind of just dived right in. I decided to apply for some accelerator programs to get the initial funding that we needed. And that turned out to be just such an amazing opportunity, because I sort of got enough seed funding to make the leap and leave my full-time professional job and start to build a team. And now it's just, yeah, busy and probably like working harder than I ever have in my life, but I love every moment of it. And none of it feels like work, because I love what I do.
That's fantastic. What is the state of the flood, excuse me, what is the state of the flood insurance market in Australia? So your friend, did she have coverage?
So she did have insurance, but not flood insurance, as it turns out. So there was like some interesting policy change following that event, because some houses, you know, they were covered for water damage or like, you know, flash flooding, but not riverine flooding. And the policy wording around it was all very confusing. So her payout was denied. She didn't get any insurance payout, because also she just, no one understands like the details of hydrology and flooding, and to choose a policy was very confusing. So, some government sort of stepped in and said that there needed to be reform on the wording around flood policy. So now the word flood, if it's in an insurance policy, that encompasses all flood, stormwater, overland flow, flash flooding, riverine flooding. It's just kind of one and the same, because it's it was a consumer issue. So in Australia, the insurance market for flooding is a little bit different than the US. We don't have a national flood insurance program. It's all covered by private insurers here. So a lot of home policies cover flood by default. There are some insurers that have it as kind of an opt-out, or don't want to take on the risk, and they will exclude it. But most of the insurers here cover flood risk, and it's risk-based pricing. So they'll do all the flood hazard modeling and work out their kind of portfolio risk and price appropriately to sort of, almost in some sense discourage people to live in really high flood risk areas, to sort of, because that's often the root of the problem.
Yeah, so I want to spend a couple minutes talking about flood risk communication, because that's probably one of the big differences between your country and our country is, we may have some technology tools that might be better. We do have the National Flood Program, but we still have an adverse selection problem. We have National Flood Program partially subsidizes rates, so when homes do get destroyed, there's an incentive to build them back up right where it happens. So we get a situation where like 10 or 20% of all of the properties in the National Flood Program are driving Pareto distribution, driving 80% of the claims. So that's a problem. And then, to encourage folks, just, like your friend in the exact same story, folks like me that are living in areas where, I'm like, have 3 feet of first floor elevation. I happen to know, that if it rains, it could flood. But if I were an average citizen, I'd probably be like, it's probably never going to flood here. Right. So what are some of the things we could potentially do to communicate flood risk? We struggle with that. It's the low risk properties that we really need them to get to buy coverage. And so it's got to be a risk-based premium. But, for Americans, we're very independent minded, and it's like, I don't want to buy it if I don't need it. And I don't think I need it, so I don't want to buy it. And you can't make it. So what are some of the things we can do? You have an engineering background, but have been trying to communicate this stuff. How do we communicate flood risk? How do we put that in a position where we can encourage every property owner to buy it, whether it's low risk or high risk?
Yeah, 100%, Nick. I think you really raised a really important topic here, because it's just something that is so not communicated well typically. And, it's funny, I'm a flood engineer, and I feel like a lot of flood engineering that's done, it's an incredible amount of engineering that goes into working out the flood hazard areas through, flood models. But then a lot of it if we look at historically, has been communicated through hard copy maps. Like in Calgary before the 2013 floods, a lot of people had to go to the library to access flood maps on a piece of paper. And, some local governments who would commission flood studies from a consultant would put the flood study up on their website on a 180-page PDF report. And this is sort of the typical ways that flood data has been communicated. But if you're, an everyday citizen, for one, you don't have time to read a 180-page report. You don't have time to go to a library and access data, in hard copy. So there's this real tech change that has happened, in the last 10 years. And I feel like the communication of flood data is still kind of catching up to that. So my vision is it's all got to be visual. For one, visual is everything. No one is going to read a huge report. We just want to be able to see interactively, where our house is and where it is relative to the flood risk. And I think there's some incredible tools out there and technology to be able to do that. I mean, yeah, going back to the Uber example again, like, millennials, and I mean, everyone to a certain extent now really expects to consume their data, like mobile, on a tablet, like on the web, but there's an expectation now to consume your data digital and like mapping based. So, I think like the power of just overlaying some of those flood mapping layers of where are, the high risk areas, the low risk areas, the medium risk areas, and then put that on like a native, Google interactive map where people can search for their address, interact with it. Because I think a lot of education is done by doing and learning and going through the process. So, if we just have like a mapping dashboard where people can look up their house, look up their neighborhood, look up the school, the work, and like find out about their catchment, where the catchment area is, what gauges are near to them, like what elevation their property is at. Like this all is a tremendous aid in helping people understand the risk. And I think something that insurers are really missing out on, like I think there's a really strategic play here that, there's so much insurance that isn't being sold because people don't know that they're even in a flood area. And so like there's this whole like part of the market that you're not accessing because you're not providing that means for education. So it's like such a simple, like, straightforward thing that we could be doing to improve that, in my opinion.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So it's something I've been pounding. Again, I generally pound the table a lot. I've been pounding the table on this. So here in the States, because the National Flood Program has essentially monopolized the market, we use their definitions for things. And so for a couple generations now, you were technically in a flood zone or not in a flood zone.
Oh my God, this is my like pet hate.
so this causes an immense amount of confusion because it's binary, right? It's either I'm in a flood zone, therefore there's a high degree of risk associated with that, or I'm clear. I'm not in a flood zone. I am free and clear. Yep. I don't have to buy insurance because I am not going to get flooded. And I believe the vast majority of properties in the Houston area during Harvey were in X zones, which are considered not flood zones. It's a huge problem. And so when I go to conferences and I give presentations or moderate, I always ask, I jokingly ask, how many of you are in a flood zone? And I watch for the hands, and then I say, well, all the hands should be up because you're all in a flood zone. It's just a matter of degree, and we don't communicate that well. So if you're, outside of these 1% probability zones, you feel as though you're free and clear. And to me, it's exactly how you described it. There's an opportunity that's being missed to communicate brokers, I feel it's our obligation to educate brokers so that they can educate their customers. And I think you'll appreciate this. We did a study for a broker. They gave us a handful of retail commercial accounts. So it was sort of like a franchise, and up in upstate New York and upper New England. And we found that out of the group, there were about 20% were outside of flood zones that actually had more flood risk than some of the properties that were in flood zones. And there was one in particular that was outside that was by far the worst offender out of everything in their portfolio. And that was considered outside the flood zone. So it's like examples like that just lead me to believe visually with every quote, with every submission, like we need to educate the brokers and let them know, it's not what you think it is. We know that you can determine flood zone and not flood zone, but it's particularly different. And it's to encourage them to get the properties that are outside the flood zone, pull them in. Like, we want to see your whole portfolio. Don't send us just the stuff that's in the flood zone. We need to see everything because it could be worse. So I've been jumping on what you just described. That's been part of our operational procedure is for every quote, for every submission, we need to either go get the remainder of the property schedule, or if we do have it all, we educate them on everything. Here's your whole schedule. Here's the flood zone it's in, but here's our assessment of the risk.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful. And it's like the best thing that you can be doing. Like, I mean, yeah, to sort of follow on from what you said, the analogy really is that, you know, we all buy auto insurance if you drive a car, you know, and like there's no like, oh, you're safe from an accident and you're not safe from an accident,
Yeah.
therefore like you get insurance. Like we're all at risk, and some of us are safer drivers than others. Like I know insurers do the stats and put their own pricing on that, but bottom line is you just never know what can happen, and so you buy the insurance. And flooding is no different. It's not like inside a flood zone and outside. Like you said, there's this whole spectrum of risk. It's the question is not am I in or am I out? The question is like, what's my risk? Like, what's my probability? And I think, yeah, that's, you know, in my opinion, maybe a bit of a failure in the way that engineers have historically communicated this with the whole, you know, it's a 1 in 100 flood event. And this is, you know, the boundary. Like it's not really done favors in sort of aiding in that understanding. So I love what you guys are doing and your mandate, because it's kind of like processes that like that are going to help people get more coverage going forward, especially those that are, you know, are lower risk. There's this pricing balance you need. Sure, the people that are higher risk, maybe they do pay slightly higher premiums, but they're going to probably get the benefit a lot more often in terms of frequency. But the people lower risk, less frequency, less premium. So therefore it's a no-brainer. Why wouldn't you have it so that when this freak, you know, low probability event does happen, then you're covered too? It's just exactly the same as any other type of insurance, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think product design here in the States is very poor. And one of the things that you know, when I talk to our reinsurers, you know, I'm looking out like 10 years, and I think one of my goals is, you know, product design. And the way I think of this is like, well, maybe we should stop considering the peril broken up in water damage that occurs inside, you know, from internal faults like a pipe breaking or a leak in a roof, a windstorm where the window gets blown out and water gets blown in. Why are we separating that from groundwater flooding? Why don't we just
Mm,
call it water damage and just wrap it up and cover the whole thing? That way, when you pitch it and sell it to your customer, you're essentially not saying flood, you're saying water damage. And
yeah, and
if they want to forego it, then they're foregoing the internal water damage, and that would be stupid.
that's so clever. I love that. Wrap it up, because and then you're kind of adding a more sort of average layer to the pricing across everyone, because everyone maybe is at similar risk of like a pipe burst or whatnot, and then you sort of, you know, spread that cost around a little bit more and make it more attractive of a product.
So that I think there's like potential for like multi-year policies. You know, if it is expensive, right? Figure out a way to you know there's only so much you can do, but figure out a way to make it as economical as possible. You know, bundle it in with other things, like remove the uncertainty. Do what you
Yeah.
can to encourage people to actually buy the coverage. That's sort of where we're heading, and it's like folks like you that are doing God's work when it comes to the technology component. You know, another thing, you know, before we transition over to the personal questions, um, I don't think this could have been done like 5 or 10 years ago. I think like we're in like a convergence has occurred where we have the computing power, we have I think the big data infrastructure that Google and Facebook and those companies built, you know, 15 years ago has been immensely valuable to be able to store incredible amounts of data and also retrieve it quickly. I just think there's like a convergence that's going on that's making our ability to communicate flood, to do the types of things you're doing, and then to package it up and sell risk-based products associated with it. I don't think it could have been done 5 years ago.
You know what? I think, yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think this is kind of a product of the fact that it's sort of like multiple, you know, trends converging. And in terms of like, it's such a good timing for the tech. We're using a lot of cloud-based technologies, big data, even starting to use machine learning and technologies like this that, you know, weren't really mainstream 5 years ago. And I guess the other thing is that then there's this the timing is right in terms of like the market opportunity. And then the third fact that natural disasters, flooding is only getting worse. So it's becoming more frequent and more severe and more costly every time. I actually just read like a report a couple of days ago by Guy Carpenter, I believe, saying that like flood insurance is the next big opportunity, and that like, you know, in like 2022, it's going to be 10 times the size of like the global cyber insurance market, like at $40 billion in the US or something. And so I think all those factors combined, like I think it would have been really hard to try and do this solution 5 or 10 years ago, but that's what's so exciting about 2018. I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of cool technology you can use. And I think a lot of, yeah, attitudes are really changing, and it makes it easier.
Yeah. I concur completely. I'm going to transition over and end the podcast with some personal questions that I like to
Fantastic.
ask all of my guests so they can get to know a little bit more about you.
Yeah.
First one I like to ask is, what would you do if you could retire today?
Oh my gosh. I wish I could retire today. What would I do? You know what? I have a real kind of a real connection with Canada. It's sort of my second home. So what I'd do is go spend the winter in the Canadian Rockies. I'd go ski, a little bit of backcountry, a little bit of resort skiing, some kind of hot trips over the new year, just like soak up the winter. And then the summer, then I'd come, well, the Canadian summer, the Australian winter, but really it's sort of summer here anyway. Then I'd spend that in Australia and go paragliding and a bit of surfing. So really kind of just have this sort of 6 months on, 6 months off kind of retirement vacation routine. That'd be nice.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. Let's just retire. Well, let's just end the podcast and just retire.
Let's just retire.
What tools or techniques do you find helpful to stay productive and or organized?
Lots. It's a really good question, actually. You know what? The simple things I really like. So Gmail, I'm on my Gmail for my emails, and just the little labeling system I use. And then I've got like a recently adopted zero inbox scheme, so that everything that comes through, I'm either labeling and filing or responding and archiving. And I have like just this kind of really, some would say OCD filing system for my emails. I know I don't have the same thing with my calendar as we established today, but that certainly like really helps me stay productive. And then I need any suggestions from the audience on calendar productivity tools. I need to change time zones a lot, and it's really killing me here. And then for our team, we use Slack, but I really like that for collaboration. And we're using Monday for kind of project management and sort of sprint planning. So that helps me kind of stay on track. Yeah.
I love that. I'll put those in the show notes. Everyone that's listening should know that we love Slack.
Yeah.
I remember trying to get Tony into Slack, and it was like dragging, kicking, and screaming. And then one day he's just like, I get it. Yes, Slack is awesome. And now we're using it internally at my company. We can write commands and have servers turned on and off. So because cloud-based servers are really expensive. And they consume a lot of electricity, and you're paying for it. So we have the ability with a Slack, and we don't have to go into the server to turn it down. We can just use Slack, use a command, and just turn it off. And if someone needs to go in an hour later and turn it on, command, turn it back on. It's so now we're thinking like workflow. How do we do more things? How do we assign tasks and other things? So I think we're just scratching the surface. I love Slack.
Yeah, you should check out Monday. It's great for assigning tasks, putting in like priority, due date. Like it's a really collaborative PM tool. It's kind of like Jira, like there's an Atlas one, but Monday is like a little bit more simple. It's a good start.
Yeah, that's it's coincidental that you bring that up, because we're examining that now. to
Oh,
try to
cool.
hand, because we have so many different projects going on now. It's like we need and that's on the insurance side. So the software development team is already using Jira. They recommended that. We looked at that, and now we're looking at a few others to see, well, Jira is kind of a software development environment. Is there a product that is more general PM that we can use for the insurance space? So
Yeah, and
interesting
that's where
times.
we chose Monday, because we felt like, we do software development, but also we do just general day-to-day stuff. So it's a bit more kind of all rounded.
Yeah, yeah. Final question. What books have you found to be influential in your business and or personal lives?
It's a good question. So I'm gonna put a like disclaimer to this before I answer the question, that I do not do as much reading as some other people. Mainly, I don't know, like I get really, really busy and I can be a bit of a doer. So I sort of struggle to find the patience a lot of the time to sit down. But there's a couple, like if I was to pick one that was really influential in my business life, particularly around like the, part of the catalyst of getting FloodMapp off the ground. I read The Torrent by an author called Amanda Gearing. She is a journalist, broadcaster, and author. And she did an investigation to some flooding that occurred in 2011 in Queensland, where, it was this one day where about 35 people died. It was awful, really catastrophic, but it was just crazy and fascinating to read this book that described this flood that hit, kind of like pretty much really similar to the Maryland flooding in Ellicott City, where it just hit these people without any warning, and what it was like from their experience on the ground. So for me as a flood engineer, we always look at the models and the hydrology, but it really like put me in these people's shoes, and it was very impacting, very harrowing. And I just, it was just cemented this idea that we need to do better. So it was a really strong motivator. Encourage anyone to read it if you want to sort of find out like what it's like to be on the ground in some of these extreme events. And then, yeah, like in terms of like what's been a good read in my personal life, I found the book Into Thin Air by John Krakauer. That was fascinating to me. It's about, the like one of the missions to climb Everest in, I believe it was 1996, one of the really bad years where there were some really bad accidents. But I think what I like about the story is it's sort of something about it that just shows like this human resilience to be able to fight through things and like just fight the most extreme conditions, and really a bit of a kind of lesson that like, willpower can sometimes like overcome extreme events, and just like pushing yourself to the limit. I find stuff like that really inspiring.
Completely. I'm going to put those on the show notes. Those are two great recommendations. And remember, it's not shameful to be a doer.
Yeah.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
I'm not going to show my office because I'm redecorating it, so I have books scattered all over the place. But I tell Tony all the time. Tony's always just like, it's okay to buy books and not read
Yeah.
them. And I'm just like,
Okay.
is it okay to spend thousands of dollars on books with the hope of reading them and then get dejected because you're such a doer, you just can't get to them?
Yeah.
But
That's
there's no shame in being a doer, Juliette.
Thank you. Thanks. It makes me feel better.
This is awesome. I'm glad we were finally able to connect. You're doing God's work. It's just as you're describing the torrent, I get the sense that your mission is beyond making money. It's beyond scientific accolades. It's about the people. It's about coming up with ways to make society better. And one way is to reduce the impact of things, to reduce our vulnerability to quick acting acts of God that can harm us. So congratulations, you're doing God's work. This has been an awesome conversation.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. Yeah, I just hope we get there, and hope to continually make a difference to people's lives, because that's certainly our social mission. And I think like working with insurers is the best way that we can reach people on a large scale, which is, yeah, it's a really exciting opportunity, I think.
Yeah. My guest this week has been Juliette Murphy of FloodMapp. Juliette, thanks again.
No worries, Nick. Thank you.
Okay.